Hi everyone, it's Gene Calderon coming to you again with another theme day that we've been going through all week. And this day, being Tuesday, we want to focus on something known as Tuesday equals Truth Day. And that's something that I really like to share when we talk about the truth of the gospel writers, and the truth of the gospel message itself. And how do we know that these things are true? Because we will hear objections from some skeptics and from people who really don't think that they're true based on the fact that they were written by man, or that they were written hundreds of years after, or don't you know about the omissions or the additions, or don't you know that the Bible itself was put together by men who wanted only what they wanted in the scriptures themselves, and therefore they controlled it all from the beginning. Now, if those truths are valid, then yeah, we'd have a problem. But what if they're not valid? And what if the scriptures really are the scriptures, particularly when we're talking about the gospel message of Jesus Christ? And Jesus Christ is the center of Christianity itself. So what do we make about that when we talk about Tuesday being the day for truth, Truth Day? Is it really possible to be an intelligent and critically thinking person and still believe that the Gospels were written by people whose names have actually been attached to those Gospels? For instance, we have Matthew, we have Mark, we have Luke, and we have John. And there's some people who believe that those people probably weren't the people who actually wrote the gospel. So what do we do? What do we make from that? Well, we have to look at some facts and some evidence that we could possibly find. And the first thing that we're going to look at is the idea that the testimony of the early church, and in fact, it's the disciples of the disciples themselves, the people who knew from the people who were there firsthand, who give us this account that they really were the authors: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The first three Gospels, which are known as the synoptics because they're very similar, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we'll look at that. And the early church testimony is that Matthew, who's also known as Levi, who is also known as the tax collector, one of the disciples in the New Testament, was the author of the Gospel of Matthew. And we also know that John Mark, who was a companion of Peter, as we read about from the early church historians and the church fathers, who told us that John Mark was a companion of Peter, and he was the author of the second gospel known as the Gospel of Mark. And lastly, when we talk about the third of the synoptic gospels, we have Luke, who's known as the Apostle Paul's beloved physician, and that he is the actual author of two of the books, the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. And we get that most of the information as we start to see in the book of Acts, where Luke is writing about, and then Paul went here and Paul went there. And then eventually, when you start reading in the book of Acts, we start reading, and we went here and we went there. So he starts to include himself in that testimony. Now, when you come to think about it, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're really unlikely characters to be credited for writing the Gospels if we wanted the people to immediately just believe what we were saying. Because first of all, Mark and Luke aren't even among the 12 disciples. They weren't there walking with Jesus every day while he was here on earth. And Matthew was a former tax collector, and he would have probably been the most infamous character when it comes to the disciples, next to Judas Iscariot, the one who actually betrays Jesus. And there would be no reason to give any kind of attribute to the authorship of these three men, these less respected people, if it were not true. There's nothing you're to be gained by this. In fact, it might actually bring up more controversy than the fact that we're told to believe this. So why would we attribute this to somebody who are not main characters? Because you know what? There's actually some other gospels out there that are known as the Gnostic gospels or pseudepigraphal gospels, which meaning that they're not actually the gospels that are attributed to people like Peter, or to people like Barnabas, or to people like Paul or Mary, or things like that. And those probably are a little bit more popular names. But here we are with Matthew, with Mark, and with Luke, three not very popular people when it comes to the disciples at that time. So why would they do that? Unless it's true. We would come to understand that based on early testimony, the first generation after the disciples having told us these are the authors, no one is bringing anything against that to refuse that or argue that, at least not till thousands of years later. We probably hear a lot about that today, but it wasn't an argument back then. The people who were sharing about why they believed these authors were the authors were credible, and the people were able to look at that and even know from their own history, which wouldn't have been that far far along back to be able to say this is true. And so when it comes to the fact of the gospel authors, we actually have some really good reasons to believe that Matthew, Mark, and Luke were the ones who wrote those first three gospels. And so we'll consider that. We'll look at some other evidences as we continue to go through this Tuesday Truth Days to be able to see, can we put our trust and reliability in the gospels themselves? Because that is the message of Jesus Christ. So I hope this helps you. I hope this is something we can look at. What do you think? What have you heard when it comes to objections to believing the Gospels or the authorship of the Gospels or even the Bible itself? Have you heard these? What are some of the questions? Or even maybe, why do you think that the Bible is true and reliable? Love to hear from you. Go ahead and put those comments in there and we will look at them and review them. It might even inspire me to be able to answer some of those questions in upcoming videos. Again, this is Gene Calderon, Indiana Regional Director for Ratio Christi, a leader at Freedom Church East Chicago, a member of the board for Lake County Right to Life, just here trying to serve the community. I hope this blesses you. If you have any comments, thoughts, or ideas, leave them. If you'd like to support a local missionary here in Northwest Indiana, look at the tab below, find out how you can do that, or contact me directly. I'm a local guy. I'm here to serve and love to be able to meet and greet and talk to each and every one of you. God bless you. Thanks for watching.